Today I'm going to work on two Mugo pines, and as I did mention in one of my other YouTube videos, although it is the end of September, almost the start of autumn, it's still quite okay to work on evergreens. You can shape them and prune them at this time of the year. I wouldn't do it with deciduous trees because they won't make new growth. But with evergreen trees, it's quite safe to work on them throughout the year, except for the coldest months of, say, mid-December to about end of January. Then I would stop. But in autumn, I don't mind working on these Mugo pines. And you can see the difference, although they're the same variety, Mugo mops, it's exactly same species, but just different in size. But when I say it's different in size, this is about, I would say, 25 centimeter high, and it's got a trunk which is about finger thick, maybe a little more at the base. But this is a much older one, and this one's got a trunk which I would say is at least 2 inches at the base. But let's work on the small one first. I've done one before on another YouTube video, but let's work on the small one first and then we proceed to the big one. Whenever we find material like this, the first step to do is to remove it out of the pot, because you will be surprised what a lot of lovely trunk lies beneath the surface. So these trees we buy from wholesale nurseries. They are grown probably, this one is grown in this country, in the UK, and they are grafted trees. The graft is there. All the name varieties of pines, this is the Mugo mops, they are grafted, so the graft is there. So usually the graft leaves an ugly mark, but we can live with that. Usually the graft does grow out, and while we are doing this, we might as well explore the base and see what lies beneath that. So the roots are quite interesting, so there is potential. The base is somewhere there. Lots of lovely roots. So it's a very healthy plant with some beautiful roots. So we can deal with that when we pot it in its temporary training pot. So we've got quite a lot of trunk here. So we're going to try and find the front and the back of the tree. If we remove some of the needles, and you can safely do this, in fact, by removing the needles, you encourage bud back, because a lot of new buds will come from the point where you pull the needles off. And we see if there's any movement in the trunk. If there is movement, we can then design the tree much more easily. So let's expose the trunk and the branches as much as possible. Just leave the tips. All these needles would fall eventually. Pines shed the second and third year needles in the autumn, so they will shed. So by removing the needles, you can now see the trunk and see what lies in there. On one of my earlier YouTube videos when I dealt with a Mugo pine, I was able to remove half the tree, and it went that way. But this tree, I don't think we can do that. But there's a nice movement there, so I can probably bring it back this way and see what happens. I don't normally like to keep thick branches, but that branch sits quite comfortably. But that one here is a bit too thick, so I'm going to remove this one. And I'll do a bit of wiring to give it more movement. I've more or less decided that this is going to be the front because I've got a nice first branch there. Look at the back. I think the tree is not so interesting from this side. There's always one side that looks better than the other side. So I will do that. And now this is in the way. I'll remove that. So by removing that, you can now see the trunk and you can see the line. If I bring it back like this and give it more movement, it will look interesting. Now how am I going to wire this bit? This trunk is a bit stiff. I'm not going to wire that because there's no point wasting wire there, but I can anchor the wire on this and go up this side here or go up the top. So let's find the right gauge of wire. I think this one I'm using, I think this is 3.5 mil. As I've always said, deciding on the right gauge of wire to use is a mixture of common sense and intuition. The more you work on your tree, the more you will get to realize what grade of wire will do what particular job you have in hand. Try and keep the wire as neat as possible. The Mugo pines are lovely trees to work with. You do find some growing in the wild, and I will show you because a customer brought in a tree that she collected from the Pyrenees in France, and she's had it for 35 years and done nothing with it, and that's going to be the subject of another YouTube video. But meanwhile, these are nursery trees. Quite a few garden centres in the UK still sell them, but as you will probably gather, that conifers are not very popular now in garden centres. So not so easy to find good conifers in garden centres, and there are very few nurseries left in this country where they actually grow plants in the open ground. That means growing the ground to thicken. I'm removing this thick branch, by the way. And already you can see just one piece of wire and the tree is already beginning to look quite interesting. There you go, just one piece of wire, this and that. And it's got the shape of a potential bonsai. Plants which are grown in nurseries, in the flower pots, usually have roots that keep going round and round because they are in these circular pots. Such healthy roots, look at it, very, very fine roots. I'm not going to remove much root, I won't cut them, I'll just rearrange the roots. And there, now let me put a piece of wire through. You can see how much soil I'm not going to use. If I had put it in a big flower pot and grown it on, it will grow much faster. But less soil, it may not grow so fast. But then I do want to slow the growth rate, so this is quite okay. These are plastic training pots, perfectly acceptable. It's only training. Tying it, and it's just to prevent the tree from falling out accidentally. I'll put the same soil back. This is almost a pure peat soil, peat and bark. So there you are, a perfectly respectable little bonsai made in a matter of minutes. And now we're going to proceed to the bigger, more complicated one. So we'll put this down and we will now look at the other one. Now this is a much larger Mugo pine, quite different from the small one we did earlier. And it's grown in a 45-liter pot, so there's quite a strong tree. And the trunk is at least 2 inches, maybe more, at the base. These are grown probably in Spain or Italy, and they're grown quite intensively, so the tree would probably be, I would guess, about 10 years old, grown very strongly from a graft, because I can see the grafting point. The first thing I will do now is to take it out of the pot. That's the first thing I always do. The reason we take it out of the pot, some people cut the pot, but as I've said before, I don't like wasting plastic pots, because every time you cut the pot becomes useless. So I've taken it out of the pot because I want to see the root base. The root base is probably the single most important factor in determining the front or back of the tree. The reason why the root base is so important is because the way it flares determines the best face. If I look at this tree, the root base is like this, quite flared that way. But if I look at it like this, it doesn't look so interesting. But you never know, by the time I've removed some of the surface soil, it may look different yet again. So let's remove some of the soil from the top and see what I find below there. Most nursery grown plants are potted quite deep. So let's tease away and see what we have below. Now, digging deep, I see that there's quite a lot of loam or garden soil or mud. So these trees would have been grown in the ground for a while and then dug up and potted into pots for selling. So if it's been grown in the ground, all the more reason why it has become thick in quite a short space of time. They never cease to amaze me. You look at that beautiful base there, and I noticed that the nurseryman has grown it in these wire cages. That's another technique they use. They grow it in these wire cages so that it keeps the root ball pretty compact. But I'm not sure it does help us, because we'll have to remove that wire cage. Look at that chicken wire. First time I've seen that done. So we don't grow these ourselves, but I came across this in a wholesale nursery back in March. I will show you the photograph of the tree where I saw it back in March. I do have a clip of it which I will add to this YouTube video. So this chicken wire basket will have to go. Otherwise I'll have problems later on. Look at that beautiful flare. The more I tease away, the more it looks interesting. This is the first time I've ever seen a nursery plant grown in this chicken wire. Look at it, it's a chicken wire basket. Quite a nuisance really, because I've got to get rid of it. Now I've teased the surface of the root. I've teased about 2 or 3 inches below the surface where the tree was potted, and you can see the lovely flare of the root going on either side. So this is a nice side to view it from. If you turn it this side, it's not as interesting. It's not uninteresting, but it's not as interesting. But let's keep an open mind. The worst thing you can do is to decide very early on which is the front and the back, because sometimes what you thought was the front or the side may turn out to be a better option. So let's keep our minds open so we don't foreclose all the different options. Now we have to decide where the branches are best placed. Now looking at it from this side, this, which I thought was the side, is looking quite interesting as a front as well, and that's why I said it's so important to keep an open mind so that you don't foreclose all the options. I've also got to find a taper, that means a new leader, and if we look closer into the tree, the taper is not all that good. From there it's quite broad, then it goes there, and then suddenly it becomes thin like this, and at the top it goes even thinner. I don't want to use the entire height of the tree. It doesn't always work using the entire height. So I may need to take a pretty drastic decision before I do much wiring. And although I thought this would make a nice front, I can't find a decent leader going up this way. I can use this to leader, but these branches are not so interesting. If I use the other side, the other broad side, let's cut these few dead branches out. These branches die because of lack of light, you see. Because they are hidden under all the other branches, they turn brown. Okay, this is a very nice broad spreading base, and again I think just making it straight is not so interesting, so I may discount this, which brings me back to using this as a possible front. Also using this as a front is possible. So there are many possibilities. See, this is nice because it goes this way and then comes back on itself. So it's got a bit of movement. Movement is what makes the trunk interesting. If it is just absolutely straight and without the movement, there isn't the drama that you would get from a bonsai. So I think I'm inclined to go for this, and this would make quite an interesting new leader. So if I were to take that as the leader, it becomes very stiff and less interesting. So this is where I have to take a very important and bold decision, and that decision is to make this the leader and then dispense with that. So I'm going to get rid of probably half the tree. So let me show it to you again, all the other options. I don't like using too many gins just for the sake of using gins, because sometimes they don't really add anything to the tree. So you can do this and use this as the leader. This is possible this way, but this ugly root is sticking up there. If I come back here, you've got to decide a leader. That could be a leader. Not so good. But I still come back to this side because this is quite interesting. And I can make that the new leader and get rid of that at the top. But then you've got to think of some back branches there. Okay, so very big decision I'm taking, which means I'm going to get rid of this top here. And here's the moment of truth. I'm not using an axe. I don't need an axe. But this lopper is going to lop the top off. All that's coming off. Less is more. I don't know whether I've done the right thing. It's too late. I think you've got to take decisions in life and not regret it. There you are. Okay, so I'm going to use this as the new leader and use these as the branches, and let's see how we go. I'm not talking much because I'm simply wiring two branches with one piece of wire, and I'm finding the adjacent branches. There are certain branches which logically pair with each other, so you should always look for two branches that you can wire together. So we get back to the front. So this is the front of the tree. This little branch we probably may not need, but I'll keep it just in case. You never know, it might come in handy at some stage. But because I'm not trying to do a finished bonsai in just one go, I have a lot of time in which to think about it. This is what we call just structural wiring. That means I'm just creating the structure of the tree. It's by no means a finished thing, because I don't think you can get a finished article with this tree. there's a lot of sap coming out of the cut branches, and I'm sometimes asked, do you need to seal the cuts on pines? And my inclination is that pines don't really need to be sealed because the resin that comes out of the cut branch acts as a sealant. So I wouldn't think that there is any need to seal cuts on pines. I'm just trying to create an apex now. So let's get rid of it. I was going to keep it as an option, but no. It's amazing how much wire you use to do a tree. I think I've already used about half a kilo, I'm sure. So this is still the front. By the way, years ago, we always used to teach people to mark the front by putting a piece of wire into the soil, so you don't forget which is the front. But I do it automatically, so I know which is the front. But if you are working on your tree and you want to remember the front, so put a piece of wire like this so that you know that you always come back to this side rather than fumble and hunt around to remind yourself which is the front. So as you can see that the design is quite pleasing. Nice bit of a triangular shape there, and the trunk is quite nice, broad there, and forming a nice taper. So we've taken out all that from the top to create this apex. And this can still be bent to give it some movement. We'll just finish off by wiring all these little bits. Just leaving an open coil to guide the wire. And then there are 4 bits of branches there. 4 shoots, so 1 for each. Whenever I work on trees like this, I don't try to create the final image straight away because it may stress the tree too much. Usually at public demonstrations, they want to show the finished tree and get a lot of applause, but they stress the tree so much that the tree seldom survives. So I'll let this grow on so that it back buds, so it forms a nice pad. So what I've done is really creating the structure for the tree, and I don't even need to put it in a proper bonsai pot. I'll probably maybe even put it in a flower pot for now, or I may find a large bonsai training pot. But looking closer now at the roots, where this wire basket was put around the roots, that worries me. So for the sake of the future, because we will have to deal with it at some point, so rather than just, ignore the problem, we should deal with the problem. So I'm just going to see if I can get this wire basket out and put it in its bonsai training pot. Growers sometimes use these wire baskets because the roots can come through it. And of course, once it's come through, then it doesn't matter. These would be planted in the ground as landscape trees. But for the purposes of our bonsai, this will not do. Again, I can see the soil in which it has been grown. It's just been grown in mud. It's clay, look at it, it's just clay. But the tree has grown well. Clay is very rich soil, but we'll put it in better soil. Finally extracted it. That was the basket. I'm not going to bare root the tree completely, because if you did that, you will really stress it too much. But where I can get rid of this clay, I will get rid of the clay as much as possible. This is typical of the nursery trees. They've been grown in the open ground and then potted up for selling. I'm now going to find a pot, a temporary training pot to put it in.
Yep.
Right, I'm going to plant this tree in this training pot. So I've brought some of these very nice deep plastic bonsai pots. I can try this one, but this is a bit small. Don't forget, we are not putting this tree on exhibition straight away. We're trying to make the tree grow healthily. So this would be a nice, comfortable pot for a tree of this size, because I don't want to take more soil off in case it stresses it too much, because it's just lumps of clay really, but I think that would fit. But knowing how most bonsai people are always very stingy and want to save money, I was just passing our shop just now, and I came across these shopping baskets, and if you can use this would also grow well like that. If you just put soil and a lot of leaf mold in it, it would grow quite well. So if you're not bothered about what it looks like, that is a very reasonable container to use. But because we have so many of these, I will just put it in this. I will tie it in so that it won't fall out, and I will use a very peaty soil for now. I won't use our standard bonsai soil at this point in time because I don't need to. When I get into a shallower pot, maybe in a year or two's time, I will then change the composition of the soil. But let's wire this in first, and then we will talk about it later. You can put either one pair of wires. That should usually be enough, or you can put two. But I think one is enough. So I'm now mixing a compost just for training this pine, and this is our base compost. We have a compost maker that mixes it for me, and it is simply 50-50 pine bark and sphagnum moss peat. The pine bark is very fine, but the texture is very open, and we have some pumice already in here, so I will just put a tiny bit of pumice. Not a great deal, but just that pine bark and sphagnum moss peat makes a very nice, we would call it a temporary or a young tree compost. So you can still see the mud. I'm not going to take more off in case it stresses the tree too much, but I will just bring it here, put some soil at the bottom. I haven't cut much root at all, hardly any, only the surface roots which were annoying me a little bit. This is still the front. And we will just fill the rest with soil. At least this soil is better than the clay it was growing in. Well, trees grow well in clay, provided they're in the open ground, and of course provided it drains well. Some of the clay soil, like on our nursery, we have what is called clayey loam. It's not exactly clay, but it does drain extremely well. And I will just water the tree in. And I'm now going to keep it in this unheated greenhouse for the rest of the winter. And I'm sure by April all the new candles will start appearing. And I have absolutely no doubt that this tree will grow on well. So this is what we pruned off, all that debris. I think we removed, I would say, 70% of the branches and foliage, and we were left with just 30%. And this is the soil that came out from the root ball, so it is pure clay, mud, plain and simple mud. Look at that, from that 45-liter pot. So that has served its use. I've got rid of that and put it in decent peat-based compost, and we got that wire mesh basket out, and that's the start of the tree. So we'll now show you a before and after so that you can see the results of what we've done. But remember, this is not a finished product. This is just half an hour's work, and this is what we have produced from a garden center or nursery Mugo Pine.